Hi, good evening, everyone, and welcome to ACMI after perhaps for some of you what is a very long Monday. We hope this evening's discussion is going to keep you all enthralled. My name is Kerry Elmsley. I'm ACMI's Executive Director of Program, and I would like to welcome you to our Immersive Exhibitions Masterclass this evening. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands and waterways of Greater Melbourne, the people of the Kulin Nation, and recognise that ACMI is based on the land of the Wurundjeri people. I pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and warmly acknowledge any elders who are present with us tonight. I would like also to welcome all sector practitioners and industry leaders in the room. It's really great to be able to share our experiences and extend the conversation with you in this rapidly developing environment. Before we begin, I'd also like to thank our partners, the British Council, for their support of this event and the exhibition. This evening we have a really great discussion planned around the future of exhibitions and immersive experiences. Melding art, technology, and all of the senses, the phenomenon cannot be ignored. It's largely a field that the commercial market have really galloped off with, and it feels in many ways that the museum sector is somewhat in catch-up, and we're going to be exploring that tonight. We are joined by a wonderful panel of experts tonight. ACMI's Head of Experience, Digital and Insights, Lucie Paterson. Lucie is at the forefront of change and innovation in the museum field, with 13 years' experience at leading cultural organisations, including Te Papa in New Zealand, South Bank Centre in London, and now as Head of Experience Product and Digital at ACMI. Lucie's work shapes the exhibitions and experiences that you see and feel here, and she will lead our sector into the future, I have no doubt. We are also joined by Ersin Han Ersin, a dear collaborator of ACMI. He's one of the directors and leads of Marshmallow Laser Feast, the collective from London who have developed works of nature. Ersin's art practice combines a wide range of disciplines, including sculpture, installation, live performance, and mixed reality. Ersin's practice also, actually, I think is an important thing that we can talk about tonight, is his practice goes beyond the gallery, beyond the digital. His involvement with his particular relationship with trees, we're going to explore tonight, but I think that's something that Marshmallow Laser Feast bring to the table that really shapes the discussion, and it's shaped the exhibition that I hope some of you have already experienced. And we're joined by co-founder and principal of the Experience Alchemists, Ed Rodley. Ed is an award-winning experience designer and co-founder and principal of his firm, and the Experience Alchemists serve the cultural sector and way beyond. A lifelong museum lover with over 25 years experience in envisaging, creating and implementing visitor-focused projects for cultural organisations large and small. Please welcome our panel. I'm going to hand over them to kick off the discussion. There'll be Q&As at the end, so join in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kerry, for that very warm welcome and excellent context for our conversation tonight. Hello and good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming out on a Monday night. Hello, Ed. Hello, Ersin. I would also like to start by acknowledging that we're on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations and extend my respects to their elders, past and present. Sovereignty over these lands was never ceded, always was, always will be. As Kerry said, I'm Lucie and I'll be facilitating this conversation. We plan to chat for about an hour or so, and then we'd really love to involve you in the discussion, so there'll be plenty of time for questions at the end. First of all, can we get a raise of hands? Who has so far been down to see works of nature? Oh, more than I was expecting. That's brilliant. Okay, so the rest of you are in for a real treat. Visitors have been loving it since we opened last week. And because we have Ersin here and in the kind of theme of the exhibition, Ersin has been in the Yarra Valley getting acquainted with some giant Australian trees. He is going to take us through a short meditation just to get us started.
Okay. Maybe we can close our eyes. I mean, I'm sure it's been a long day. It's Monday. The weather wasn't that great. So just settle in. And also, before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands and waterways. And imagine those lands and waterways. People of Kulin Nation, and the ACMI is located in the land of Wurundjeri people. So if you can bring your attention to your breath, inhale slowly and exhale. Feel your shoulders and the tension in your body, where your body meets the chair, the ground. Inhale and exhale. Continue with this rhythm as you imagine 20 billion molecules rushing into your lungs, darting faster than the speed of sound. That oxygenated blood reaching your heart. Your heart pumping like murmuration of birds, feeding rivers from the center to touch every cell in your body. Under your skin, you are that land. Inhale and exhale. Inhale and exhale. Now bring your attention to your fingers. Move it very gently. Coming back to the room, to your body. Opening your eyes very gently. Welcome back. Did you all close your eyes? Check your wallets now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ersin. I almost dropped my laptop. I feel so relaxed. I think every public speaking engagement should begin with a meditation. Okay, so as Kerry said, this is called Immersive Exhibition Masterclass, and really came about by a stroke of luck or magic, as one visitor has described the exhibition downstairs, because Marshmallow Laser Feast Works of Nature was opening. So it meant Ersin was here, and the National Digital Forum in New Zealand was having their conference, which Ed keynoted at last week. So it meant that Ed was close to here. So we felt this was a very cool opportunity to have a lively dialogue between the three of us. So we hope you enjoy it. It was really important for ACMI as part of this exhibition that we talked about how these sorts of exhibitions are made, how they have come about, what they offer our visitors, what they don't offer our visitors, where museums fit into this, and what the future is for these sorts of experiences in our organisations. It's probably important to define what we mean by immersive exhibition up front. So for the purposes of this discussion, we're referring to the phenomenon of these large-scale digital experiences that can include, but not always, have projection mapping, large digital screens, and AR and VR interventions. These kinds of experiences first came onto my radar in the 2010s, and then Team Lab have really cemented them into our landscape. Currently on in Melbourne right now, you could go to see the BBC Earth experience, Connection at the Loom, the Princess Diana experience, Monopoly Dreams. I could go on, there's so many, but you should all go to Marshmallow Laser Feast, of course. And adult tickets range from about $30 to $50 for all these different experiences. They're popping up all over the city and even in our suburbs. So these experiences really have come about because of advancements in technology, earlier on arts and cultural organisations opening up their out-of-copyright collections, and also cross-disciplinary artist collectives like MLF forming. As Kerry said, audiences are going to them in droves, and even though museums have the content, the buildings and the audiences, we really are playing catch-up. Museums are now trying to redefine their position in this experience economy where there is fierce competition from other industries doing these kinds of things. And like Ed keeps reminding me, we all know how hard it is to get projectors right now.
High-end projector. Cheap ones are still available.
Arts Hub reviewed works of nature and suggests that audiences are becoming blasé about these types of exhibitions and that they might be losing their impact, but says that there is a difference with this one, and it's a profound one. So tonight we are really going to talk about what museums can bring to these experiences. But before we go there, as I said, I heard Ed's keynote and also attended a workshop that he ran called Exploring Playful Engagement, Designing for Interactivity and Delight last week, which was brilliant. And it felt really like an informal PhD on the topic of immersion. So I would really love, Ed, for you to kick us off by describing a little bit about how you define immersion.
Wow. Okay, for a first question, that's a toughie. I will preface it by saying I haven't confirmed this yet, but I've been told by reliable sources that at Disney Imagineers, you are now forbidden from using the word immersive in pitch documents because, as we know with these terms of convenience, they tend to get so overused that they start losing all meaning, right? And immersive is kind of a great example of that because we're all immersed all the time, like you are immersed right now in this theater with us. So when I think about immersion in terms of visitor experiences, I go back to work done by people like Janet Murray in the 1990s when all of this digital stuff was new. And they were looking at some of the earliest generations of digital immersive experiences. And if you just look at the etymology of the word, right, what did immersion mean 100 years ago? It meant getting dunked in water. And psychologically, all of these experiences are very similar to that in the sense that they disorient our default way of going through the world. Right. So psychologists will talk about the fact that we have two different attention systems operating all the time, right? There's the one that allows you to walk and breathe and do all of the other things without having to think about like left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot. And then there's the more cognitively intensive system that you apply to things that you actually need to figure out, right? So if you've ever seen someone walk into a door that they thought pushed and actually pulled, that's the moment when attention system 1 shuts off and attention system 2 turns on. And in the same way that when you jump into a pool, right, the moment after you dive in, that is the moment when attention system 1 turns off and attention system 2 goes, oh my God, what's going on? You're feeling cold water all over you. You're no longer stuck to the ground the way you usually are. And your brain starts paying attention in a way that we generally don't. Like we have evolved in such a way that we can spend as little attention as possible on our surroundings so we can focus the very limited processing power we have on things that are threats. So for me, the thing about immersion is that it's a very ephemeral experience and it's a very transitory experience. It is that act of going from one environment that you were immersed in, but you don't think of as being immersive, into a substantially different environment that you recognize as different. And so for that time period when you're sort of trapped between two worlds, that for me is the time when you are immersed. And interestingly, it's usually a twofer, right? So if you think of yourself walking into, say, the exhibition, there's that initial immersion when you are like, oh, I'm no longer in the museum. I don't know where I am. It's super cool. But then on the back end of that, there's also the transition back into the default world, right? So if you think of being in a film that you really enjoy, in that moment when you're suddenly standing on the pavement again, going like, what happened? Your heightened awareness of the real world is a second immersive experience that I think there's a lot of potential in there that I would love to explore later.
Or even just coming out of that meditation just then. Yeah.
Yeah, that particular kind of silence, right? You don't often think of like theaters like this being perfectly silent. It makes you pay attention, right? And that is in many ways the scarcest resource that anybody has nowadays. So things that allow you to actually focus your attention on one thing, I think have tremendous potential to like do good in people's lives.
And Ersin, when you're working on exhibitions like this and works, what are you thinking of when you're trying to put someone into an immersive state?
It's often inspired by the source of the phenomena, whether it's being with the tree, being a single drop of water, exploring the root structures of an Amazonian tree, obviously we haven't experienced falling into a black hole ever, so I don't know much about that one. That's very imaginary. But it's primarily trying to understand an emotional arc throughout the piece, what that's trying to convey, what I felt in the first instance of thinking, conceiving, experiencing this space, this phenomena. And then it turns into a process where, because often the audience is arriving from a busy street, very much like here, how do you actually, set the primers correct to bring the right intention of the work, or the right mindset prepared for the work to be conceived or perceived in a neutral state? And obviously it's not always possible for every work, but when it comes to each individual pieces that we've got here, they all conceived one way or another with a form of meditation, or even if it's an instruction from the docent, from the invigilators, it's told in a whispering voice in a darker room. So you don't have a space to sit down and fully immerse and have a meditative experience, but at least the way you interact with everyone the moment you get through the doors of the installation is tailored to enhance that moment. And obviously the filmic terms, every piece you've seen are individually designed in different times of, in different periods in our career and different years. Obviously the theme has been running somehow concurrently, but we've never put a feature length film together like this. And it was all short films curated, tailored with their own, how do we create an onboarding? How do we, create the ultimate environment to experience the piece? And then how we can create these offboarding. And obviously you don't need to probably design and dictate how the onboarding and offboarding should be for every piece of art you do, and people don't, and that's totally fine, but when it comes to some of the feelings, like standing in front of a giant sequoia tree is really moving your the sense of self-importance away from you when you are witnessing something so large, so, awesome. Obviously, how do you recreate that? And those are the primers, and trying to create that moment in the experience. And actually, if I can riff off of what you said about the, going back to 1990s, through this research, one interesting thing emerging, and we've been kind of monitoring this. Where do I feel this immerse? Where else it happens? Obviously, when we do breathing meditation, it helps. You're there in that moment. When you exercise, you are there in that moment. And then looking at the different architectural settings, like being a St. Paul's Cathedral, and probably most of the cathedrals designed to create that awe and that feeling of being united with something much larger than yourself. And if there's a choir inside, the way it reverberates, it obviously amplified. The entrance of a cathedral, the long corridor that you move forward and get a glimpse of the narrative, and you arrive at the big chamber, is an experience. But when you roll back even 2,000 years prior to Christianity, you look at the Orkney and the Stonehenge, these are the places that are designed to evoke certain sensations in combination with the sound. Drumming, if you play 60 BPM in Stonehenge, it creates this resonant frequency, actually alters your consciousness. Breathing fast alters your consciousness anyway. So where I'm going with this is basically, us as species haven't changed much for the last 20,000 years, maybe 30,000 years, and our wired cognition immerse itself, finding different tools throughout the history. And rolling today, I'm not surprised that we are receptive to immersive media this much, because it's very innate. And whether we become numb to it, probably certain tools, we would become numb to it. But overall, the idea of immersion or embodiment is not any new, and it's, you know, as old as probably our species, and different ways that we've been exploring it. So basically trying to understand and entangle and kind of that dissects what influences you, and how can you optimize that feeling to evoke that sensation. What is it like to be that tree? What is it like to feel to be under the ground and feeling mycelium? How does it feel to dive into a human body following a single breath? And they all kind of require their own individual immersive sequences that starts with onboarding and offboarding.
And I think, what you were saying about setting people up to be able to be in that headspace is so important. And Eleanor's here, who did the beautiful exhibition design downstairs. And the ACMI team really worked closely with Marshmallow Laser Feast in making, I guess, more immersion possible, or really trying to work across the gallery. With the onboarding, definitely. We know that unlike these kinds of experiences outside of museums, here it's really important that we're striving for audience outcomes, is what I'm trying to say. So I think other sorts of organisations that are doing these sorts of things there might not be text or explainers or interpretation or that kind of scaffolding, but because we're a museum, we really want to leave people with the right sorts of messages and feelings and improve their lives. So I think most importantly for these kinds of works, we need to make sure that we're letting people have time with the works so that they can really make sense of them. And so the design is really important. So the onboarding, and also kind of cutting off sight lines, which might seem quite counterintuitive, but trying to kind of give people time with each of the works and not wanting to be tempted to go into onto the next thing, to really take it slowly. So I think so far the feedback has been really brilliant in terms of keeping people in that kind of slow zone and breathing and all of that. So I think, it's been a really interesting process to work on it with you. I also just wondered, Ed, in terms of the onboarding and that kind of setting people up for the right thing, I know that immersive theatre and theme park design do this quite well, and I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how you see devices or approaches from these adjacent fields. Perhaps there's something that museums can learn.
This is being recorded for posterity, right? Okay. Museums suck at onboarding, and they suck worse at offboarding. So I like to tell people that museums oftentimes operate like a game where no one ever tells you the rules. So visitors' ability to get the most out of the experience is often very limited. As someone who used to work in art museums, in particular, you would often see happening in the galleries people uncomfortable with the experience, like people who are not experienced museum goers, and they look around for some kind of scaffold to hang on to think like, how do I get the most out of this experience? And in the absence of anything, they just sort of fall back on copying what other people do. In terms of people who do it better, I mean, Ersin, you can just say onboarding and offboarding for the rest of the night, and I'll happily listen to it. The places that I think have done really interesting work with onboarding and offboarding, immersive theater is one of them, sure. But I think I'm a big fan of live action role play of the Nordic variety. So not just elves and goblins, but the folks in Scandinavia have, for 2-3 decades now, well, probably more than that, it's been since the 70s, yikes, been really pushing at the boundaries of what can you get groups of strangers to do together. And their onboarding, and particularly their offboarding, is just so impressive to watch in action. And they do things like, what would be a good example? One that I'm familiar with was it was a weekend-long experience where people would go to an abandoned fishing village in Norway, and you would take on the role of a villager in 1942 Norway, which is occupied by the Nazis at the time. Nothing really happens except you're living under occupation, and occasionally characters just disappear because the Gestapo has taken them away. And you know that some of the characters are their sympathies lie with the resistance, their sympathies lie with the occupier, some of them you don't know where their sympathies lie, and you just get to experience what life is like. So they can be really intensely emotional content, really hard stuff. There was one a couple of years ago where they were recreating the beginning of the AIDS epidemic in New York, where you spend an evening and all of the people there just start dying off one after the other, and you're trying to come to grips with what would it be like if everybody you knew was starting to die of some mysterious illness. So they can tackle really, really hard stuff that we struggle to do in museums, and the ability to be able to offboard people, to be able to sit and reflect, what just happened to me, right? Oftentimes in a museum setting, you go from gallery to gallery to gallery, and you have an emotional arc, and then you're in a hallway. You go to another gallery, you have an emotional arc, you're in another hallway. And we know that where people start taking these experiences and turn them into durable memories is not while they're in the gallery, right? All of that happens afterwards. That's where the reflection starts taking place. And hopefully those reflections lead to things turning into memories, right? Because that's supposedly what we're after. We want people to remember the things that have happened while they've been with us. And that all happens afterwards. So if your design mandate ends at the gallery doors, then you pretty much preclude any opportunity to let people try to take all of this knowledge and join it with the stuff that is already in their head. And there are lots of other people who do a really amazing job of it. One non-LARP experience I would just throw out there is Alejandro Inarritu's VR experience, Carnegie Arena, which is this sort of meditation on people trying to cross the U.S. southern border. So you're basically a ghost wandering around in the southern desert at night, and you come across a group of migrants, and then the migrants run into the Border Patrol. Super heavy stuff, incredibly immersive. But I think the most powerful part of it is at the end, there's a very traditional kind of museum gallery where you can learn about the actors, all of whom are migrants themselves. You can learn about their personal stories, and you have a chance to actually come down off of a pretty scary emotional experience, so that by the time you get out the door, you've already had the chance to start reflecting on it and to start just slowing down.
Do you have any suggestions for museums in terms of how we could better integrate onboarding and offboarding?
I'd love to hear what Ersin has to say about
Ersin, what do you think?
How can museums do better? Right.
Where to begin?
Yeah. No, I mean, the interesting part where, okay, can I just go on about Mona a little bit? How amazing. Have you visited Mona? It is an experience where when you remove the authority of the gatekeeping institution into a very personalized journey, because you are immersed with your own will and as you like, as long as you like, without any boundaries, is extremely well working. And seeing series of museums and installations and being to a number of biennials, I think it is probably the most exciting museum experience I've ever had. And just on the back of what you're saying, the onboarding and offboarding issues where museums tackle, I guess there's obviously an ongoing problem or opportunity maybe at the same time. If Louvre has been visited, it's one of the most visited museums in the world, and immediately an immersive show pops up, the Carré de Lumière, Atelier de Lumière next door, selling at least half as many tickets, that many people visiting immediately, with only 1 year being in there, without having a Mona Lisa, the most known painting in the world. And how is this happening? So there is obviously, it's less of what I think museums should do. It's more that probably museums holding a mirror why people are choosing Museum of Ice Cream in New York over MoMA, why people are choosing Atelier de Lumière in Paris over Louvre. Probably there is something about how we are communicating culture as an institute, and how we are bringing audiences without keeping any of those gates, or opening it up deliberately and obviously to include more of the public, because it's so easy to feel stupid in a museum. Like it's just bamboozled by the words and the way things framed and how you feel, and you're just like, shit, I can't make noise here. Everyone's super quiet. It's a white cube. It's very clinical, and you know that is a feeling, and I think it's got all the problems of the previous century, and the source of the cabinet curiosities, very privileged point of view coming into a place. If we are talking to public, how do we create a space for collective healing? It's the art is the purveyor of hope. How do you convey the hope? If you can only do that to a selective bunch who can actually, you know, receive the message that you are trying to give from a very high frequency standpoint, obviously there's a problem there. So I think it's obviously, you know, there are probably so many ways that this could be done, but one of them is, I guess museums can look at all the immersive experiences. What are the access points? How people are feeling more, you know, tune into that. Is it obviously? I don't mean, by the way, you know, this Van Davis's magnificent book, The Art in the After Culture, describes the 2037 dystopic future where we dumb everything down so much. The only remaining art is the immersive art that has no words, and it's just this audiovisual, you know, extravaganza, and we left all the really valuable pinnacle of human culture behind in exchange of this really accessible form of art in everywhere in the world. And that's if you haven't stumbled upon his article or the book, I cannot recommend enough. But that is a really good reflection, because as an artist who's making motifs, creating a language and trying to communicate that language, and probably art is that for many individuals. You as the museum, who's the interpreter, who's the provider of the dictionary for the art and the artist. How do we create, like, strike a balance where the audience who are really engaged and interested in the immersive nature of certain experiences, and how do we bring audiences who are so not engaged in the other ones that are also important to talk about into the same remits? If not, there's a disconnect, and what will happen, probably the museums who can afford to have an immersive wing and a traditional wing will have, and the ones who can't probably will remain as the archaeological sites in 50 years' time. It's very packed, lots of things. We can also unpack any individual part, but that's how I feel.
I would love to hear from you, Ed, on that. In terms of, why do you think these exhibitions are so appealing to audiences at the moment?
So I've done probably too many hours of looking at TripAdvisor reviews of immersive Van Gogh and its ilk, and this is not to dump on immersive Van Gogh, by the way. It's a very fashionable sport in museum land to sort of poo-poo these things.
And your socks.
Can I highlight your
My
socks?
Van Gogh socks.
Also Van Gogh. Yeah.
I was ready for tonight. Looking at the business model of the people who are putting these shows on, there's a very select set that seem to actually be financially successful, right? So you brought up the example of Klimt. Like, Klimt didn't make money. Frida Kahlo didn't make money. The ones that do are the single name Western canon artists, right? Van Gogh, Michelangelo, that very, very small universe of people that the general public will recognize as art. So thinking about the people who are going by the millions to these immersive experiences, it's not the word immersive necessarily that is driving them. They are looking for something that is a proxy for, like, this counts as a cultural experience. And I think immersive has sort of deteriorated to the point where it basically just means good. So if you have the choice of going to feel dumb at MoMA, looking at the Van Gogh, or going someplace where you can be immersed in Van Gogh and not be made aware of your lack of art historical knowledge, which certainly in the US is endemic. I mean, arts education has just been, the level of it has been going down for decades. I think that is really the thing that is driving people. They want to have a good time. They want something cultural. They know that if they go to a museum, they're not going to get it. They'll get the cultural. They may not get the good time. And they are deciding, therefore, like, well, we know Van Gogh is a real legit artist, so let's go look at this Van Gogh thing. So I think there's tremendous opportunity to do a little bit of reflection about, like, why are millions and millions of people choosing to have their art experiences in, former department stores that have been fitted out with zillions of projectors rather than going to museums. There could be some really, I think, fruitful soul searching as a result of that. In terms of your original question, what else could they do better? Welcoming, right? Welcoming is so important. And if you, close your eyes and imagine your archetypal museum entry experience, how are you made welcome? Right, when I go to places like Meow Wolf, which is an artist collective that started in the American Southwest, and they do these gigantic physically immersive experiences. You can't even get into the parking lot without someone there welcoming you, making sure you have everything you need, and trying to set you up for the experience in the same way you were talking about the care that you have to give the front of house staff. Who are the ones who are directly interacting with visitors, to be able to just help them feel comfortable that, am I doing it right? We know that adults are super afraid of being embarrassed in public, and that will drive a tremendous amount of inhibition. And if the point of having a satisfying emotional experience is the let go of that inhibition, you have to not feel like you are constantly being examined before you can actually relax. Before you can feel something deeply, before you can process it. And in general, the field does not do as well as a lot of other kinds of organizations. Like the first time I went to Meow Wolf, I remember we were standing in line. We had tickets for the beginning of the day. It's like 10 a.m. There were 50 of us in line, and there's a woman walking back and forth up and down the line saying, like, if you get halfway through and you feel like you don't know what you're doing and you're doing it wrong and you're lost, you're probably okay. So just don't worry. And you could see people in the audience, the shoulders would just drop perceptibly. They're like, oh, okay, because I don't know what this thing is. It's crazy, whatever it is. I know that much from watching the commercials. That kind of caretaking is a thing, I think, that if we could do more of that more successfully, that would be a huge win for the field. Particularly art museums. They're behind such an 8-ball nowadays in terms of having given this impression, with a lot of good reason, that they are aligned with the elites. It is not the art world, it is the art market. And if you're not part of that world, then you can come, but you're not really the audience that the institution's really interested in. Read a tombstone label on an artwork, and that is what the museums are telling you about most of the objects in the museum. That is the important stuff you need to know. It's the name, it's the title, it's the medium, and then it's a long list of who paid for it. And people aren't dumb. If you look and see, like, those are the 5 facts that they want me to know about every single thing in this museum, then it's not hard to make the connection that that's what the museum cares about. Ooh, that was a lot.
And Ersin, just getting back to what you were saying earlier, and I think Kerry also said it, that this is the first large-scale museum exhibition that you have done. Could you just talk a little bit about your process compared to other presentations, and what do you think ACMI being a museum has brought to the experience?
Oh, loads. I mean, obviously. So because of our engagement with the virtual reality, which we take it as a master medium in pretty much all projects, even if they manifest themselves as a screen-based immersive installation. It starts from this 360 world building, designing point of view, and often starts and ends there. The filmic terms, since we're in a cinema, making loads of really good titles and a short film, and a good credit afterwards. But obviously, ACMI bringing this expertise of how you create a 90-minute exhibition. And the works themselves, it could be we could put in any order. Luckily, they put in an order that made perfect sense, and utilizing some of the poetry, and then doing magnificent work with the poetry that we gave, rewriting and then just building this narrative across the board. So this practice of, I guess, two things. As an artist, letting go, because, and this letting go is not from a strange place, because we occupy multiple worlds as a collective. Exhibiting in an architectural biennale 1 week, going to a film festival the week after, and then a new media conference the week after. Because of this emergent fields, every possible creative inquiry claims ownership over the media that we play with, and therefore they embrace us. And it's wonderful to go those places, but every setting is different, and every organization you engage with is different, and therefore we try to kind of come up with very definitive tech riders, and how the experience should be experienced, and how do you create we've got a dozen script for every piece that we've ever made that goes with it. But obviously, working with a museum who's already got this in their practice, like that was the most incredible part. It's like, right, guys, actually let go. We got this sorted. We know how we do this. And beautifully taking those, creating a feature-length experience with the care of the visitor experience staff right at the beginning, all the way to the end. And then obviously for the ones who's seen the piece, building in a way where you descend into the soil with a breathing rhythm that try to kind of, condition you a little bit to breathe with that rhythm right at the beginning with the staircase. The sounds are coming from the Amazonian rainforest that we recorded in 2020. There is this really strange cognitive flow advantage. When we feel and hear bird songs, it's safe. And it actually feels there. If the birds are not, tweeting, another predator around. And it's really interesting feeling, and that was our feeling being in the Amazon. So we wanted to bring that in, and that just, starts from the beginning where you feel comfortable. You just hit the breathing rhythm, and then you can read some of the poetry. It's not trying to say so much other than the things that you already know about breath and how it connects you to the living world. And then taking into all the parts. And then the last part, obviously, the bit that we couldn't ever put it on our tech rider elevator that takes you back into the soil line at the exit, which is quite fascinating. Obviously, those are some of the architectural details of how you do this, but bringing the technical expertise, the narrative expertise, and running exhibitions with public in such scale changes our tendencies, and we expand some of these pieces. So Evolver, for instance, the piece that has the journey of breath, the breathing cell, the beating heart, and the Evolver virtual reality, is actually a single piece that was conceived as a virtual reality piece that we launched 2 years ago in Tribeca Film Festival. But because of this dialogue with the ACMI's curatorial team and design team and technical team, we managed to pull the virtual reality out of that VR headset, which is the main friction point for us. How many people you can really get through. In one hand, genuinely want this work to be impactful, communicate the themes that we want to, but if you can only show it to 6 people every hour, how much of an impact you can really have. So, working with the museum design team and the curatorial team, expanding that into a space where, how do you maintain attention throughout that space? How do you stay true to the source of the actual virtual reality piece, where when you stand in the middle of your lungs, look up, which no one does normally, it looks like massive trees. And that's the virtual reality experience, finding these very simple similarities between the living world out there and the world and the ecosystem in us. Those two screens, spreading across. When you stand in the middle, you see the left and the right lungs filling with the oxygenated air, and you follow that into a single cell, which you lie on your back and experience this embryo taking its first breath. And you realize who's breathing who. Like, I breathe exactly like that cell. So being able to take those themes and expanding into space to create a collective experience, I think the most exciting part for us, and the best outcome of this collaborative process that we had with ACMI.
That's brilliant. And yeah, it is a beautiful rejig of the VR work. And so, yes, it definitely opens it up to more people to be able to experience it. But we could also say that it is less immersive because you are less kind of, encompassed in the work. Are there other sort of things that you think audiences gain or lose between the two different versions?
So we call this immersive meter. If you've got VR in one side, the most immersive media of all, the other side is probably billboards. And we are still close to virtual reality, but probably not as much. And virtual reality is this luxurious medium for an artist where you land your eyeballs, your ears, sometimes your skin, because you're wearing a haptic vest, and your taste buds. We often use scents for different experiences. So you've got this uninterrupted attention of the audience. That is so luxury in the current attention economy. Things flow better. The some of the themes that we are trying to convey resonate more. But again, the biggest issue is the throughput, how many people you can really have that experience. That being said, what we are witnessing now, a new dynamic emerging when you have a group of people experiencing and exploring different parts of the same space. Some of them are paying attention to the beating heart. The others are looking at how the lungs are actually taking and converting into something in a very kind of abstract way, and then you merge those experiences afterwards, and the group, it becomes this choose your own adventure based on your attention points, but still there's a collective shared experience at the end. So you are probably compromising some of that immersion that is impossible to replace otherwise. But then bringing this collective experience into it, which opens up, spaces like this and allows us to, speak to more people.
And can I just piggyback a little bit on that? So one of the things that Punchdrunk was really, I think, at the front of recognizing the value of that for things like their immersive theater presentations like The Burnt City or Sleep No More, when you were down in the bar afterwards, which was their offboarding experience, since you're going through these multi-story physical installations on your own, and people would often go in groups. What would happen is somebody goes to the bar, and then you wait for the rest of your group to trickle out. And what happens immediately is you ask, like, well, what did you do? And then you start sharing these experiences, and by the time you're done, your own personal experience of like what I myself encountered in the experience has been supplemented by everything that everyone else has told you. So your experience actually becomes larger than it actually was, because you've had that opportunity to take on these bits like, oh, you got dragged into a cupboard by this woman and she gave you a locket. And, our ability evolutionarily to take on stories that we have been told and treat them like they're reality, in this regard makes these kinds of offboarding experiences really powerful, because you get to go away with more than you actually got, but only if you have the opportunity to be able to have the chance to talk about it. So that is why I'm such a fanatic about offboarding in particular. It's such a missed opportunity if you just dump people out of the gallery or out onto the street without at least giving them a little bit of a chance to just start that reflective journey.
Just to riff off this, the one of the main aspects, and we've been having this conversation on and off since we started the whole journey with ACMI team, it really doesn't matter what happens in the gallery, especially for works of nature. The themes and topics we are trying to communicate are very universal, probably throughout history. The species found different ways of conveying and feeling that interconnectedness that is very real and potent, yet somehow we manage to trick ourselves not to have it or not to feel it. So it doesn't matter what happens in the gallery. What matters is what happens when you go to the park. There are amazing eucalyptus trees outside. I mean, just 15 minutes bike ride, you've got one of the oldest trees in St. Kilda, in Albert Park, like somewhere between 300 to 500 years old tree. Sitting with a being that old and feeling that connection, because you're taking somewhere between 17,000 to 30,000 breaths a day, and at least a quarter of them coming from a tree round by, then it just evokes that feeling, and that exhibition becomes a primer for you to feel that connectedness afterwards. So, onboarding, this curatorial journey, what you read inside, and the offboarding, it's all for this one moment that you may or may not have in a park with your house plant or when you're reading something.
It's the first time that we've done the offboarding like that, and we were so blessed with all of your incredible behind-the-scenes content, all of your process work. I don't think we've ever worked with an artist that has documented their practice and process quite so much. So when you do go through the exhibition, make sure you collect everything onto your lens, and then our curatorial team have written incredible content that hopefully extends the visit for you further, and you can dive more into the themes around the work. But I'm guessing that is quite an intentional part of your practice to document like that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I think it's the most exciting part for us. It's every one of those projects are a great opportunity for us to learn, and probably every one of them teaching us more than my entire biology education in high school did in 3 months, and but also beyond that, we kind of follow this four and a half step process where it starts with the research and the concept phase, where you start digging into an idea, whether because you had an experience or because you read a line, a paragraph, a book somewhere, and then start researching into it. And that research leads to finding field experts and then interviewing them. So you can tap into this like one-on-one expansion of how that idea could be molded afterwards, how you can shape it with the ground truth, and often starts from a scientific point of view, even though we take artistic license, further down the line, but at least it's grounded in that place. And for Evolver downstairs, you can see these fMRI scans, the cardiovascular data coming from Fraunhofer Institute is the highest resolution kind of cardiovascular data ever recorded. We couldn't even open all of it. It was like a part in looking at how a single, I'm going to say this wrong, maybe like 42 muscles in the heart, just doing a sequence of things to just push that blood 40 miles an hour to your body, every heartbeat. It's magical when you start from that place. And then obviously looking at the second phase of prototyping, looking at and I'm obviously putting a big pause here. That pause is the fundraising. Sometimes it's like 3 months, sometimes 7 years. That's concept to the prototyping. So the prototyping allows us to engage with technologies to which one of those technologies could evoke or come close to creating these feelings, like embodying yourself or disembodying your body and embodying something much larger or much smaller than yourself. For Ocean of Air, becoming a single drop of water and flowing through a tree, or becoming as big as a oxygen molecule going into a human body. And those are, it's really difficult to convey otherwise. Looking at different media, is it augmented reality? Is it large screens? Are we using virtual reality? And looking at the hardware and software, and then, coming up with a plan where this could work, and then going into a detailed process of just creating a narrative. But the narrative is often not a written narrative. It's like an emotional arcscape where, because we look at it from a multimodal point of view, meaning, in order to evoke certain feelings, maybe the visuals are not the most compatible or required ones. So sometimes silence combined with a smell, this strange substance, when the first rain hits the ground, it unlocks a bacteria called geosmin, and that's the smell of rain in our brains. So what if you get that smell with the silence? What's the surface you are sitting on? Experiment on that. So you just reconstruct this multimodal, cross-modal narrative as a kind of experiential or kind of feeling space, and then turning into a written format. And obviously, the most interesting part we often bring back to this kind of offboarding or post-experience part is the process that we go through. The few things that I should mention, the interviews we've done with Stephen Harding, Marilyn Sheldrake, Katie Field, now became small podcasts that can be accessed through ACMI's lens and the website, which for the curious mind and the eye, you can actually dig deeper and find the source of these ideas, where it goes to one of those researchers or the scientists or one particular kind of advancements they had in their line of inquiry, and it's great to share that afterwards, obviously. So the full story. And then, the fourth step is obviously we create it. And because of the real-time mechanics and working with software design, it allows you to iterate throughout the process. Sometimes you have a very clear idea of what the final thing will be and how it's going to feel, but very often happy accidents happen throughout the way, and we go, in different directions. That pisses all the producers off so badly, though. And you always run out of money and definitely spend all of it in the first 25% of your line. But we arrive at the place, and then the audience meets, or the kind of the test groups, let's say, friends and family, inviting them, say, can you go through this thing? I'm not going to tell you anything, but does it feel this way? Or they come back and say, no, I didn't get any of this, or I got this. And so we've got this very iterative, interesting process, which can be probably a parallel or very similar to game design, where they go into this extensive QA processes, looking at both software, but also experience design, the reward mechanism and interaction mechanics. So we've kind of, we experience that part in the last phase of our productions before it ends up in a gallery or a museum.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ersin. Before we throw it over to questions from the audience, I just wanted us to focus a little bit on looking into the future and how museums can prosper in this space. A little bit earlier on, when the three of us were preparing for this, Ed, you talked about the need to create an ecosystem of this work in our sector and more broadly. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about that.
I'll try. So one of the things that is the most interesting about the kind of work that you're doing, Ersin, and like the folks at Team Lab are doing, is that it's very hard to currently pin down how it fits in traditional practice, which is exciting and also makes it just harder to do because we haven't figured it out yet. Like to Ersin's point about Ben Davis's book, like the critique isn't there, the theory isn't quite there yet. We're kind of figuring out how do you look at this stuff We didn't even talk about like, how do you preserve this stuff? Do you preserve this stuff? And I think the challenge for museums is so much of this expertise lies outside of the traditional roles that people who wind up working in museums possess, that it requires a willingness to be very collaborative. Like you have to bring in a lot of partners to make these kinds of things happen. And it's just a thing that is hopefully just going to take time. With more and more museums recognizing, okay, we want to do these kinds of things, therefore we need to go find people who can do X, Y, and Z. And it's going to require probably, to Ersin's point about like the artists needing to let go, it's going to require museums to let go a little bit of the authoritarian impulse of we have to be the ones driving what the message is, and to just be comfortable being authoritative. Right, which is a little bit different. You can be authoritative and still stand back and allow people to have an impactful experience, but it does require you to step back a little bit more than we do traditionally. And that's probably going to be the biggest change, particularly for the technological fields, where so many of those people can make so much more money doing anything but museum work. What is the thing that we have to offer that is going to make it worthwhile for those potential collaborators to actually be willing to collaborate? Because as you know, the work is super hard. It can be extremely frustrating and time consuming. So being able to be clear about what is the value of like the work that Marshmallow Laser Feast is doing in a museum context as opposed to a biennial or a gallery context is a thing that I don't think we've articulated yet, because I think it is there, right? So, look at the immersive Van Goghs of the world. I look at those and I see like, oh, there's so much opportunity to do more than those people are willing or able to do because of the business model they've set up for themselves. Being able to actually enumerate what those things are that are the opportunities and make that clear to people is probably going to be one of the big challenges for the cultural sector, I would say, for the next few years. And some will get it right and probably a lot won't.
And besides Mona, do either of you have any examples of places anywhere in the world that you think might be on the way to doing this well, or kind of moving towards something that we see as being a positive sign? Silence.
No.
I mean, I'm sure there are places they are engaging with it that we don't know. Oh, Art Science Museum, Singapore.
Yeah. Okay.
Yamaguchi Art Center in Japan. Some of the few places that springs to mind that manages how they actually disseminate that knowledge and the core of the artwork into audiences without any gates is just fascinating. I think these are a few places that they've been practicing. So if you sit down and think a little further, yes, it's more that the big institutions that is like the must go to places in every city. Are they doing it enough? Are they really looking at this? Probably not. I think that's the big no there. But just going back to the ecosystem parts, and yes, the critique is such an important part of growing, evolving, understanding, but also creating a knowledge, not just for the artists to, get a critique and get better at what they do, but also from an audience point of view. The film critique is important because it's not my full-time job to research the full history of this, the director and the look at the script and its relevance and how it's well executed and the performance of the actor. But if I can trust a professional to come up with some of those critiques, I may or may not agree with them, but at least I can create an idea, an opinion that is very well informed based on that. When it comes to immersive media, we don't have it. We don't have critique that actually allows you to go, right, maybe that Van Gogh experience is actually quite good because of XYZ. It fits in this place in media theory from an art history point of view, but also from an engagement point of view. And then you can make your own judgment to agree or not. But because we are only hearing all the good things, which is how incredible and immersive and amazing it was, and, you know, sometimes framing a little less nicely probably than that, and just saying, oh, maybe it's a 3-star. It's worth seeing after the 5th thing you see. But there's no way that us as society can get a grip on this fast-moving landscape and understand the media and how it's forming, because audience forming the media and creating demand, and also the media is forming the public. And so that is such an integral and missing part. This knowledge share, you know, these conversations don't happen that often either, right? It's like, you know, just being able to access that knowledge share part, I guess we'll do all together. And finally, preservation. Is it worth preserving? And if the institutions don't take that role to preserve media, immersive media, you know, who's going to do it? Is it always on the artist that I have to update every work I do, and I have to work hard to keep up with the technology that's coming up? And because you don't want to go into the art market, which is the private realm, protecting and preserving on behalf of you because it's valuable and it will become more valuable tomorrow. Probably there is a role for institutions to come in and, you know, untangle this part. And when we detach the monetary value to cultural value of things, we can have a bit more honest conversation about what's worth preserving and why and how that could create a better ecosystem. So I think those 3, which is very in line with what you're saying, Ed.
And I think the question around preservation, I think one of the things that immersive media offer for the museum sector in particular is the idea that it may be okay to not preserve everything as much as possible all of the time, which is kind of the way museums operate at the moment. It's an extremely maximalist viewpoint. Everything shall be preserved as inviolate as possible for as long as possible. And maybe there are other ways of thinking about that.
I think a lot of museums would find it challenging to re-present something like the exhibition downstairs in its entirety. So there's definitely a balance. So what's your experience being as an artist so far with preserving or talking to institutions about acquisition? And
I think the most informing experience we had was with British Film Institute, who holds one of the largest moving image archive in Europe, definitely in the UK. We wanted to collect one of our virtual reality pieces, In the Eyes of the Animal, that we created in 2015, still tours. It's about embodying different forest creatures' sensory perception. So you become a mosquito, an owl, a frog. It's quite joyous, but when we designed it, we were exhibiting in an outdoor setting, so we had to also design helmets that go on top of the virtual reality headsets, which brings another element to preserve. And then these computers and running, 20-meter cables that are very unique in a forest setting, and because it was an outdoor installation. So it was presented that way, I think captured the media's attention and still tours, and there's still appetite to see and experience this piece. So BFI wanted to collect it as their practice into new media collections and opening up just now. But because they obviously don't collect objects, because they don't collect software, this is very new. And it was a really interesting dialogue where, okay, is it what do you need to preserve the computers, 10 of them? How many do you need? Is the magic number that you can present this work again in 50 years, 100 years time? Or is it just a description of how it was working, so you find another way of the modern technology to run it again? you may never do that because of all the changes. Because since 2015, we've gone through 3-4 generations of headsets, at least 10, 15 generations of software. I'm not even I'm talking about beta releases in between, and we were the ones who are constantly updating and upgrading those. We settled in a place where I think preserving a 360 video of this virtual reality experience, dropping the helmets, they don't have any space to preserve it. Therefore, you can't even preserve the smell of the helmets, which comes with a mossy smell of the forest. Computers, forget about it. You've got a USB stick and everything in it, and it's a Dropbox link. So it was a very interesting process, and I don't think that's going to be the only one, or it's the only the experience we will have. But it was an interesting teaching moment where which part of an experience is worth preserving, and how do you preserve an experience as a whole? So if you can't have that full conversation, I don't know if you're going to know ever. But one part of me is I'm a little bit tired. I wish an institution was doing it rather than us trying to update it nonstop. Yeah.
Museums can't even update their own software, let alone yours. So don't get your hopes up.
Right.
Okay, I think this is a great time to turn to the audience for some questions. Thank you so much. We've covered more than I had even hoped. If you have a question, please raise your hand and someone with a microphone will come and find you. We've got someone in the front row.
Hi. That was such a great talk. Thank you. Ersin, you mentioned briefly before about sort of more traditional game design, and my question, so I've worked in traditional games, I've worked in, more interactive experiences, and you sort of see, you can have games that are more artistic, you can have art that is gamified. And I guess my question is, in games, regardless of whether they're artistic, whether they're, Call of Duty, sorry, not to be rude about Call of Duty, but it's not that artistic. You have a lot of user testing, like, almost to a fault, especially if you're in a very large company. Whereas with traditional art, I would imagine there's not a lot of user testing. You're not taking your art to people and going, hey, do you like this painting? Should I change it? With what you're doing, like, how much user testing do you do? Is there any, or do you just trust that the audiences will sort of do what you want them to do?
It's really interesting because there's a sliding scale there. There is a technical due diligence that it requires for every piece of work. For Evolver, we were developing a 5G technology that beams the content from the servers into the headset wirelessly. And we are both developing technology, trying to maintain a fidelity of the visual stuff, also going through the experience of what you're trying to convey. That needed thorough user testing throughout the last 3 months of the production, because it's not just the experience. It's not are the colors of these particles good? It's more that, does it getting any stutter? Yeah. And if that happens, does it take you out of the experience? What is the threshold where it's still imperceivable, or that you can go with it? Or when does it break the experience we are trying to kind of create? You start with a meditation, go into a VR piece. If it starts kind of, dropping frames, then you have a problem. So it's both hand in hand. And then the other one is often the multisensory elements, where we go full cross-modal design process. Scent is extremely different, and the perception of scent varies so drastically, culturally, but also age-wise, and a really nice smelling smell for a young audience could well be imperceivable for an elder audience. And these are the tests that you have to do. It's less of the artistic side, it's more the mechanics of, is this the desired artistic level that I'm trying to convey, and is it working? So it's less of, so game design and the QA in the game process is also reward mechanisms and looking at the interaction mechanics and understanding how long an audience engage while playing this game. We don't really do that part. That's slightly different.
Thank you.
Who else has got a question?
Hi, I wanted to talk more about the multimodal stuff. So someone like me who has visual impairment, the most immersive part of that is the meditation because I don't have to concentrate. Visuals make me always in the space. So, that seems to be, the visuals seem to be the thing that is perceived as the spectacular, but it's not necessarily the most inclusive. Can you talk about some ways of inclusivity with immersive experience?
Sure. I think the sound design, we were really lucky for two reasons. One was working with James Pulley, the composer and our collaborator, who's worked on 4 of the projects that we are exhibiting here, coming on board to create one coherent journey. And so every part was that. And obviously multimodal or cross-modal narrative allows us to expand beyond visual dominant storytelling because it's not always the most important element. If anything, actual lack of visuals allows us to somehow amplify certain moments of this experience. I don't know what you thought about the vibrations of the cell. That was a very intentional cranked up a sub in the cell scene, which you can feel the breathing of the cell, and we deliberately left it to a space where it's almost inaudible, but you can feel the sub in your body. For the Tides Between Us, where the prince, this cavernous space right after, expanding the space much, or the perception of space much larger than itself by including these wet echoic sounds into that space. So it is very much in line with the cross-modal storytelling allows us to build more memorable moments. And by doing so, it actually naturally makes it accessible, obviously, with the same consideration. So allowing ourselves to build a more inline sound design for the felt sound and the sonic space, it allows us to kind of build that into a broader spectrum. So that's one. And obviously for the In the Eyes of the Animal piece that I was talking in the beginning, the most important part of the experience was a haptic vest that vibrates. Feeling the wings of a mosquito, feeling the ribbit of a frog through your body is more important than the visual. And actually the frog visuals are quite faint and almost black. So I think there's a power in there that allows us to expand beyond, and we try to capture some of it throughout this experience. I don't know how you felt.
Do you want me to
Yeah,
answer?
of course.
That's why we're here.
I liked it. I felt the sound more. I liked being able to, and I guess that meditative bit where you force people to break their consciousness and to do something completely different. For me, that was great. That helped it sort of go on more. But yeah, that's my only thought is the whole sort of Van Gogh Alive. Sorry for the socks. Van Gogh Alive experience is so based on visuals, and it's in museums and art galleries. We are terrible at dealing with accessibility, and this is exciting. You can put someone in a black box with a smell of beer and a sound in their ears, and they'll be there. And that's where I think the real excitement about this comes from, is an ability to take people to a place that they don't get to go, like being a mosquito.
And I think you hit on something particularly about the cultural sector, is that it's a very example-driven field, right? You can say something till you're blue in the face, but until there is something out in the world that you can point people at and say, look what they did here. That's usually when people start jumping on the ship, and we certainly have been so visually focused for so long that even talking to people about considering there are other senses that humans possess that are powerful becomes a real challenge in that regard. Like even to the extent that our vocabularies for talking about scent and sound are really impoverished compared to the vocabulary we have to talk about what are you seeing. To Ersin's point about scent, like I worked for a couple of years on a project where we were trying to incorporate scent in the museum, and it was some of the most irritating visitor research ever because people couldn't actually tell you what it was that they were feeling, or the words they would come up with would be really bad analogies because there just aren't the words to be able to do that. So it requires a level of what's the right word? You need a really tough skin to be able to work on these kinds of projects because people can't even tell you oftentimes how it's affecting them. You can sometimes see it, but it's a hard road. And I think shows like this where you're actually able to demonstrate the power of this kind of multisensory approach is probably the fastest way to move the field forward in terms of practice. But there's a long way to go in terms of getting people, progressive institutions may incorporate sound, but they're still very visually focused. Scent, very difficult. Taste, that's what I'm waiting for.
Yeah.
We got one coming.
You got to say more than that. You can't just say we've got one coming and leave it at that.
Cliffhanger. It's called Sweet Dreams. We've done a series of explorations of the same theme where our debt to desire and our twisted relationship with food. The very first version that we created was a telescopic straw in a virtual world would allow you to suck the sun. And as you drink that straw, the sun gets
What does
smaller
the
and
sun taste
smaller.
like?
Exactly. It's Sichuan paper with ginger.
That's my Moage Journeyman, isn't it?
We're working with Fettax, Heston Blumenthal, and their kitchen is just what does the sun taste like? And there's obviously an assumption there. But what's more interesting is you would still do it. Even though you're drinking the sun, that was the whole hook. You would still do it. Everything will die, and you would still suck that straw, and the sun is gone. And now we are expanding this into a full, I think 95 minutes piece for Manchester International Festival in Factory, launching in June. So it'll be fun.
We have got another question in the middle here. Yes.
Hi. So I used to be in the Immersive project team at Mona. I sort of left there and did other stuff because I got a bit bored. But what you say about Heston is really interesting because he did these experiments where he would put headphones onto people who were eating chips. This is in that TV documentary. And he found that people's sensation of the chips changed based on the frequency of sounds. So our senses are innately tied together in our brains. We can't experience the world unless we experience everything together because we don't have a impartial, objective view of reality. And I think there's a really great book I encourage people to check out called Michael Haberkamp's, Synesthesia or Designing for the Senses. It's on Berkhauser, but people working in immersive and mixed reality should really look at adjacent fields like car design, because car design is a really f***ed up design field where they invent the sounds of cars, they invent the smells of the interiors of cars. And Michael Haberkamp writes a beautiful book about how to design sort of multimodal and across a lot of different sensory sort of inputs. And he was like the head of design at Ford. So it's very basic, but he comes up with some really beautiful ideas. As far as vision, we have too many images in our heads already. In about 2010, we did a project with Film Victoria where we wanted to make a game which had no visuals because we knew visuals would pour out of people's brains anyway once they heard stuff. So there is power to taking things away because your other senses fill them in as well. So there's a lot of interesting things that can happen there. And just for Ersin, you should have been here 20 years ago because in 1999, one of the first exhibitions at ACMI was actually Shah Davies showing Osmos. Yes, and that is a masterpiece of VR. It's wearing a vest and one of those old Virtuality One headsets, and you're breathing through a tree. So you did get such a such a compaction of the different senses of the body and the skin and breathing and feeling the tension and seeing the visuals and being levitated. It was really amazing. Yeah. So I encourage people to think about different ways of combining those little experiences and just simple things you can do, because things are tactile, things smell, things that exist. And I think one of the things with VR is that you've got master assets. So the beautiful thing is that you can repurpose those 3D assets and create different types of experiences that people can sort of go in and out of.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We are out of time. It is 7:30. And I think, I've really enjoyed our discussion. Thank you so much. I hope everyone else has as well. As you would have heard from Ersin, the whole point of the exhibition downstairs is to really embody the principles around the work and take them out into your life outside. So visiting parks, etc. So to kind of continue that, we really encourage you to come to the exhibition to get a taster, but then to come back to our film program, Artificial Eye, Unnatural Perspectives on the Natural World, which kind of ties a lot of this thinking together. And also lastly, next year, 14th and 15th of February, we're holding the second FACT Symposium, which is Future of Arts, Culture and Technology. We had the first one this year and it was brilliant. So if you booked online for this masterclass, then we'll also be sending you a super early bird price offer shortly into your inbox too. But most importantly, I would really like everyone to thank our esteemed guests, Ersin and Ed.